pre-1971 history or the 2001 period. But we are in a new era. Pakistan should pursue a Pakistan first policy. Bangladesh should pursue a Bangladesh first policy. China should pursue a China first policy, and the United States can pursue a United States or an America first policy. It's the rise of China as a great power. That's undeniable. It's happening.
Open conflict, you just said it. Do you see any feasibility percentage? Anything?
Yeah, I
Ever?
wouldn't put, clearly there are flashpoints that could lead to a confrontation between the United States and China. I mean, the most obvious one and the one that's most discussed is the status of Taiwan. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party clearly is the largest party in Baluchistan as well, not just into Quetta, but along the Makran coast, from
Okay.
Karachi to Puzny to Gwadar. Just don't ask me whether the mangoes were better in Pakistan and Bangladesh, or don't ask me which cricket team I support.
Well, John, Mr. Ambassador, we are very privileged to have you here. Hello and welcome, PakBanglaConnect. This is Sadia Sattar with you after a while. Today, we are honored to welcome Ambassador Jon F, Lanidowicz, a distinguished U.S. diplomat who served both in Bangladesh and Pakistan, which is very interesting. I'm going to tell you his brief profile now. He was the Deputy Chief of Mission at U.S. Embassy in Dhaka, Bangladesh, around 2012 to 2014. He was the Consul General at the U.S. Consulate in Peshawar, Pakistan, 2014 to 2015. And his earlier roles include political and economic counselor in Dhaka, leadership in Pakistan's international narcotics and law enforcement affairs, and positions in Washington Bureau of South Asian Affairs.
History isn't important, or the pre-1971 history, or the 2001 period. But we are in a new era. Pakistan should pursue a Pakistan first policy. Bangladesh should pursue a Bangladesh first policy. China should pursue a China first policy, and the United States can pursue a United States or an America first policy. It's the rise of China as a great power. That's undeniable. It's happening.
Open conflict, you just said it. Do you see any feasibility percentage? Anything?
Yeah, I
Ever?
wouldn't put, clearly there are flashpoints that could lead to a confrontation between the United States and China. I mean, the most obvious one and the one that's most discussed is the status of Taiwan. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party clearly is the largest party in Baluchistan as well, not just into Quetta, but along the Makran coast, from
Okay.
Karachi to Puzny to Gwadar. Just don't ask me whether the mangoes were better in Pakistan or Bangladesh, or don't ask me which cricket team I support.
Well, John, Mr. Ambassador, we are very privileged to have you here today, and truly looking forward to our discussion because you've had an extensive experience of staying both in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and you dealt with people here, you dealt with the embassy here, and you've seen how the political changes are going on. And especially if we talk about after August 2024, there is a huge change as far as Bangladesh is concerned. In fact, the whole South Asia. So starting off with our conversation, I'd like to go first with your reimagination of South Asia. What vision do you propose for the region's political future?
Sure. Well, thanks. It's great to be here with you, and thank you very much for the invitation. Just to step back and just give you a little bit of context of where I'm coming from. So as you mentioned, I served for almost 3 decades, or just a little bit more than 3 decades, as a U.S. diplomat, and I had the honor of serving in both Pakistan and Bangladesh on multiple occasions. So my association with the region began in the early 1990s and continued up until as you mentioned, I was in Peshawar in 2014 and 15. So it's been about 10 years since I served in an official capacity. But I think more relevant and more important is that I retired from our State Department Foreign Service just several years ago, back in 2021. So for the past 4 years, I've been a private citizen. I've been associated with a human rights group based in Washington, D.C. called Right to Freedom. But everything that I say reflects my own views. I don't reflect the views of my organization, Right to Freedom, and I certainly don't represent the views of the United States government. So this has been a change for me. And again, I don't want there to be any confusion that I'm speaking in any official capacity. But
Right.
in terms of your question, I think it's a great one. Pakistan just celebrated its National Day, its anniversary as a creation as a state in 1947, which was obviously a critical year in the subcontinent as a whole. So with time's passage, obviously the situation changes both internally within the countries, within the region, and the global context. So when
Right.
I first started working on Bangladesh and Pakistan in the 1990s and then going into the 2000s, it was a very different context. It was still very much the end of the Cold War context. Then, with the events of September 11, 2001, there was a very different context in the region. And now, 2+ decades on, it's a different context altogether. I've been mostly focused on Bangladesh, less focused on Pakistan, but I think there are some similarities. And the first thing I would look to is just demographic change. And in Bangladesh, the revolution that you referred to of last August was very much led by young people, the Gen Z, and they are having a tremendous impact in Bangladesh. I know that this younger generation is also having a significant impact in Pakistan and more broadly. So, to get to the specifics of your question, I think really the opportunities for the region relate to the changing global context, but also the demographics and the changes, within the countries of the region. So that's not to say that history isn't important. It's not to say the pre-1947 history isn't important, or the pre-1971 history, or the 2001 period. But we are in a new era. And I think that's one of the things that is certainly the case in the United States with the Trump administration, that President Trump came in to office with very much a fresh set of eyes. And while his views toward the region are informed by the past, he's shown a willingness to challenge kind of conventional wisdom. And I think that's a healthy thing that all of the countries in the region could learn from.
Right. So you've mentioned President Trump, and we've seen his back-to-back statements regarding this region and global, of course. In this specific context, you said he's not moving conventionally. So you want to tell more about it?
Sure. So, in the United States, as in many other countries, there are elite opinions about foreign policy. There are those in academia, in think tanks, retired diplomats such as myself, who have a certain view towards foreign policy. What President Trump has come in and he's shaken things up because while he has many of these people from those backgrounds who are advising him, he's very much his own person. And he also is a very political person. I mean, anyone who's a president is a political person, but I think President Trump in particular is very much in touch with the grassroots supporters of his party and of his campaigns. And one of the things about President Trump and helps explain his election both times was the fact that he was very much responding to and in dialogue with the supporters at the grassroots. And he was much less concerned with what traditional elite consensus was in Washington, D.C. And I'll give you one example. I mean, President Trump, contrary to what many people have thought about him, he came in very much focusing on the importance of peace, whether it be in the major conflicts in the Middle East or between the Soviet Russia and the Ukraine. And in other parts of the world as well, we've seen President Trump really focus on this. I think this reflects his own views, but I think it also reflects what he thinks is the view of the American people, which is after decades of involvement around the world in various conflicts, frankly, the American people are tired of this, particularly tired of the cost in blood and treasure to themselves, their families, and their loved ones, and wants the U.S. to have a different role in the world. So I think this helps very much explain how President Trump sees things differently than his predecessors might have.
Lovely. So, if we go into a little more detail, because obviously we're talking about the US and the United States of America has a
Mhm.
global impact, undeniably. So, how do you see it's changing South Asia in particular? Because we've seen so many
Mhm.
changes, like we've mentioned 2024, then things happened here in Pakistan as well. So, how do you see it's shaping or the stability of this region? How do you see President Trump or the US and his tenure is, is going to be, of course, relevant, but what changes do you see?
Right. So the birth of Pakistan coincided with the end of the Second World War and a unique moment in world history in which the United States came out of World War II in a
Mm-hmm.
position where it had resources that far exceeded those of other countries, which had been more directly affected by the war.
Right.
So the United States took on a maybe an oversized, ahistoric role globally, certainly focusing in Europe, but in other parts of the world as well. And then the
Mm-hmm.
conflict that ensued with the Soviet Union for multiple decades. Um, I think the current situation is a very different one, and I think President Trump has recognized that. So while the U.S. has clearly has global interests and has a global role. As I mentioned, President Trump is redefining this. I think the most important thing to understand the Trump administration's foreign policy is the focus on America first. Now, some people see this as in an overly negative light, meaning that the United States is totally withdrawing from the world. I don't think that's what it means. Frankly, I think if you look at it, every country should pursue a blank first policy. So Pakistan should pursue a Pakistan first policy. Bangladesh should pursue a Bangladesh first policy. China should pursue a China first policy, and the United States can pursue a United States or an America first policy. So what this means, I think, is that there will naturally be areas where the United States and other countries, whether it be in South Asia or more broadly, will find that their interests coincide and they can work together. But there may be other areas in which those interests come into conflict. And I think this is the mistake that many people have made. Many people have made the mistake of just projecting forward, that they may have seen a previous trend line that may have been the case in the last administration or for even years or decades, and assume that that trend line would continue. But the disruption caused by President Trump's election to a second term, which is very different in many ways than his first term, I think has challenged a lot of this conventional wisdom. And we're still relatively in the early stage. It's less than a year since President Trump was inaugurated. So I think we'll see this continue to evolve over time. And the reality is in South Asia, in specific regard to Pakistan and Bangladesh, and more broadly, the full Trump administration team is not even in place. We don't
Right.
have ambassadors who were appointed by President Trump in place in any of the capitals, really,
Mm-hmm.
of the South Asia region. Um, we don't have key positions in Washington at the State Department, et cetera, that have been filled.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you'll still see U.S. policy toward the region evolving. And again, reacting to events which were not foreseen, as again has already been the case in South Asia and certainly
Right.
elsewhere.
Right. And now moving on to, since we're talking about powers here, so how does the China
Mhm.
factor reshape choices for Bangladesh and Pakistan? We've spoken about the US. How about China?
Sure. So, after or toward the end of my career in the State Department, I had the opportunity to teach as a faculty member at the United States Naval War College,
Okay.
which was a fantastic opportunity. And we looked a lot at historic examples. So, I think again, if you look at this moment in history, one of the great forces shaping this moment is the rise of China as a great power. That's
Mm,
undeniable. It's happening, and it's understandable why it's the case. This is not the first time in world history that a power has risen. I mean, there was a time when the United States was not a significant world power, but over the
mhm.
course of the 20th century, the United States rose, and at the same time, and in some ways linked to that, was the relative decline in British power, for example. It wasn't necessarily one caused the other, and certainly in the case of the United Kingdom's relative decline and the United States' relative rise, there was not conflict between the two. In fact, the United States and the United Kingdom have one of the closest relationships, probably in the world. I mean, people refer to it as a special
Right.
relationship. So I think you need to separate the fact of China's rise from any analysis of how this will affect the United States. As I mentioned before, um, both during the Trump administration and previously, there are critical areas in which U.S. and Chinese interests coincide. Um, but there are other areas in which there are conflicts. So the real challenge for us, both as Americans and as Chinese and as others in the world, is to see how this relative change in balance of power is managed so that it doesn't lead to open conflict, which ultimately would not be in anyone's interest.
Open conflict, you just said it. Do you see any feasibility percentage? Anything?
Yeah,
Ever?
I wouldn't put a percentage on it, but clearly there are flashpoints that could lead to a confrontation between the United States and China. I mean, the most obvious one and the one that's most discussed is the status of Taiwan, which
Mhm.
China sees as an integral part of China, and which, by tradition and even by legislation, the United States has assumed certain obligations to help defend against outside aggression. So
Mhm.
that's a potential flashpoint. There are other potential flashpoints as well within the broader region. So I think the strategy that both the United States and China have taken is that we will have a relationship in which we talk to each other,
Right,
that there are regular channels of communication. There are channels that can be specifically activated during a time of crisis. And at the senior most level, there will be these contacts as well. Um, but beyond the kind of hard power potential conflict, there is certainly economic competition between the United States and China. And we're seeing that play out right now in these negotiations over trade and tariffs. And it's
right.
understandable that both China and the United States would try to maximize their advantage. What's trickier is the ideological aspect of this.
Mhm.
During the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, there was a huge ideological component,
Yeah,
the competition between capitalism and communism. Even though China is a communist country in name, the ideological challenge between the US and China is different than perhaps the challenge or the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So understanding how the US and China are both cooperating and competing is important, not just for our two countries, but certainly for
Mhm.
others in the region, because both the US and China have important interests throughout the Indo-Pacific region, certainly within South Asia. And there are bilateral relationships, whether it be with China, with India, with Bangladesh and others, where the U.S. and China will compete. But competition is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
We compete in all manners of life, and competition can help people bring out the best as well.
Right. We are going to have a very interesting question, and you can pass it if you want. But right now, I would like to ask you about you've been very outspoken about
Mhm.
democratic reforms in Bangladesh, right? So, how do you see the debate evolving now? Because now is the time when we see a lot of, conversation and debate going on among Bangladeshis. So, how do you see that?
Sure. So it's a complicated question, right? Bangladesh has a complicated history, and the world did not begin on August 5th, 2024, when former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina departed Bangladesh. So the challenge that the interim government led by Nobel laureate Professor Yunus inherited on August 5th was the result of over 15 years of increasingly autocratic rule. The economy had basically collapsed. There had been a kleptocratic administration which had looted the state's funds. The banking system was again about to collapse. The administration, the police, the security forces had been thoroughly politicized. Um, and there were tremendous challenges in law and order in the immediate aftermath of Sheikh Hasina's departure. Ultimately, the interim government will be judged by history by how well it transitions to an elected government following elections, which are now scheduled to take place in February, and by the degree to which the system, which itself had been a significant problem and reason for the rise of an autocrat, the degree to which the system can be reformed. Now, at the same time, the interim government is still a government, so it has to govern day to day, and people have day to day concerns, whether it be with
Right.
inflation, economic issues, law and order. But I think the challenge in Bangladesh is for people not to get too focused on the day to day, and also
Mhm.
not to forget that there's a history that led to this moment, and to support the interim government and the effort more broadly to ensure accountability for past crimes, to promote meaningful reform, and then to successfully transition to a democratically elected regime, which hopefully will govern better than previous regimes have governed in the past.
Right. Who do you see is the most popular at the moment, if you want to comment on?
Yeah, so it's difficult to assess because there really haven't been any I think quality polls that have been done. We don't have voting election or voting information from the past 15 years because there haven't been meaningful elections since 2008. In terms of the parties that will be contesting, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party clearly is the largest party with the largest number of workers and the most resources at its disposal. So I think most people assume that the Bangladesh Nationalist Party is in the best position to gain a majority and govern after the election. The Bangladesh Jamaat Islami is probably in a second position based on its organization, its support, et cetera, notwithstanding some of the historical reasons why the Jamaat has not gained as much support in the past. There's a new political force that's emerged, led by the students who were at the vanguard
Yeah.
of the revolution, the National Citizens Party. They've made some strides and they obviously have important levels of support, but they also have some challenges that are the challenges that face any new party in terms of financing, organization, et cetera. And then there are a number of smaller parties. The Bangladesh Awami League, Sheikh Hasina's party, will not be participating in the election. Other parties may also face restrictions on their activity. So I think, the most likely outcome is the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, but ultimately the voters will decide. And I think what's most important is that there be a high voter turnout, that voters
Mhm.
feel free to express their preferences, and there's a good election which allows them to, express their views freely.
Right. And Awami League is not coming back because that's what one of the YouTubers from Bangladesh was like, it's a full stop, ma'am. Is that correct?
Yeah, so certainly for this current election cycle, the Bangladesh Awami League will not be able to participate. I mean, that's been a decision by the interim government and by the Election Commission. And this is really pending the outcome of the trials that are underway against the former prime minister and many of her key supporters who have been credibly accused of crimes against humanity. What happens in the future with the Awami League remains to be seen. And I think one important outcome of the election, again, related to the issue of voter turnout, will be how much support the Awami League continues to receive. I mean, Awami League supporters will say, without really any evidence to back that up, that they still enjoy the support of 30 or 40% of the country. I think that's wildly overstated. Certainly, in some parts of the country, they'll have more support than others. But I think
Right.
their actions last summer and over the previous 15 years alienated large segments of the population. So I think what the elections will show is that Awami League support is not as high as people may believe.
Right. Great. Now, coming back to Pakistan, a very quick question. If you want to talk about it, great. Um, I wanted to ask that, particularly Balochistan, if we talk about. So CPAC is going on, and we see the recent statements from President Trump, and the Pakistan-US ties are really, really warm at the moment. So how do you see this balance going on? And any comment on Pakistan's
Mhm.
diplomatic or diplomacy, between both the powers?
Yeah, so I should start by saying that I loved my time in Pakistan. I spent a total of 5 years in Pakistan between the period of 1999 and 2015, with various lengths of time at different points. And because of the positions that I held, I had a rare opportunity to travel extensively throughout the country. So I had the opportunity to travel in the tribal areas and the border, different parts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, in throughout the Sindh, the Punjab, and importantly, into your question, within Baluchistan as well. Not just into
Mhm.
Quetta, but along the Makran coast, from
Okay.
Karachi to Puzny to Gwadar. So I've probably
Lovely.
seen as much of Baluchistan as most U.S. officials get to see during their time.
Right.
And I recognize it's a complicated situation. I mean, Pakistan has a number of these challenges, which, other more ethnically homogeneous states don't face. So whether it be within Baluchistan or within, the tribal areas or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, and even within Sindh, I mean, there have been these problems of insurgencies. I think, there's a strenuous legal process within the United States to identify foreign terrorist organizations. And, the
Mhm.
Trump administration has gone through that process to identify organizations within Balochistan, as has been the case previously in other parts of the country. So I think there's a difference, an important difference between legitimate political expression and legitimate political opposition and the use of terrorism. And unfortunately, there's a tendency often of whataboutism. People will point to other historical cases, even frankly within the United States. I mean, some would argue that the actions of the Sons of Liberty in Boston, nearby where I live, in the early 1770s in protest against British rule, that those activities amounted to terrorism. I don't think those arguments, though, I mean, they may be interesting for academics or they may be interesting, over a long, session with friends. I don't think they're that useful in terms of looking at the current situation. I think the bottom line is within Pakistan, whether it be in Balochistan or elsewhere, there has to be this distinction between legitimate political dissent and opposition and illegitimate use of force against, as we've seen in Balochistan, the tragedy of so many innocent victims who have been targeted by these actions. And one of the areas in terms of the U.S. and Pakistan where there will continue to be cooperation is against terrorist groups, whether they are operating within Pakistan, within other countries, or within the United States.
Right. And when talking about the terrorism, Balochistan Liberation Army has been a designated terrorist organization of yours by the US as well. And we really hope and wish to eliminate this menace because it's taken a lot of innocent lives, which is definitely a very, very sad and tragic thing. And John, since you are an advocate of human rights and you have your own NGO, you're a board member of an NGO that is a freedom of
Right to freedom.
right to freedom. So we really wish and support your word about such, human rights violations, which are somehow twisted into something else, but not the human rights violations. So there's huge propaganda going on. And in present times, it's really hard for many people to sift between disinformation, misinformation, or reality, or the fake things going on. Just a quick tip regarding this particular region. Obviously the sentiment of this region's people are different. They deal with things differently as compared to the Western countries, and you must have noticed that. How do you see, the media war going on, or the disinformation and misinformation? Do you think it's enough is done, or you want to give any tip to the Gen Z, particularly watching you on our channel from Bangladesh and Pakistan both, how to deal with this to have a very a reasonable or rational point of view and deal with things properly, because you've spent your time, you know the people, you know their behavior. So would you like to comment on that, or a message to Gen Z in particular?
Sure. So I haven't spent as much time analyzing the information environment in Pakistan as I have in Bangladesh, but I suspect there are many similarities.
Yes.
In Bangladesh, it became clear to myself and others that this was really a case of David versus Goliath, that those spreading disinformation and misinformation had a lot of experience in this. They had a lot of resources at their command. In some cases, they had the support of state sponsors, and they were able to act very quickly and kind of flood the zone. Since much of this disinformation, misinformation was also happening on the X platform, those in Bangladesh who sought to counter this were at a disadvantage because most of Bangladesh's conversation online is inwardly focused. It takes place in Bangla and it takes place on Facebook. So
Right.
on Facebook, Bangladeshis talk to each other. What we try to explain to people is that it's not sufficient to talk to each other. It's important to talk to the world. And rightly or wrongly, much of the world's conversation is taking place in English and it's taking
English.
place on the X platform. So the
Right.
first thing I would say to people in Pakistan is to take a look at these same issues and ask how much of our conversation is happening internally in our own languages, how much of it is happening externally, again, whether it be in English or other world languages, and what are the platforms on which this conversation is taking place. It's important to understand the adversary. It's important to understand the source of this misinformation, disinformation, and you can learn from tactics that they have used in other places as well. And
Right.
often there's international collaboration. But the most important lesson I learned, and the one I would want to pass on, is that you don't fight lies with other lies. Because
Mhm.
in a way, all this does is it validates those who are telling the lies against you, because it becomes a tit for tat. The way you counter lies is with truth. And
Right.
it's hard to do that. It's tempting when somebody's down in the gutter to join them there. But I think maintaining this high ground and speaking truth is the most important. And again, even in a place like, Baluchistan, or as we saw in Bangladesh, um, there are human rights challenges. There are people who are legitimately fighting for what they believe are their rights, and they should be allowed to do so. So
Mhm.
not everyone in Baluchistan who speaks out on behalf of these issues is a terrorist. But it's also naive to think that everyone who's trying to put forward another group or another view is a human rights defender, because there are others who have malicious intent. So I think being very specific, countering the lies, telling the truth, and not engaging in lies yourself. The other thing, again, which is, I know, a challenge from a security perspective, but one of the things we learned in Bangladesh was that an effective strategy for the interim government was an open door policy. During the
Right.
previous Hasina regime, one of the tactics the regime used was to isolate Bangladesh. They didn't issue visas to journalists, to human rights activists, to think tank people, to expatriates. Somebody like myself never would have had the opportunity to visit Bangladesh during the Hasina regime. But during this interim government, I've had the opportunity to travel twice. Nobody has interfered with my ability to move around the country, to talk with whoever I wish. People felt
Right.
free to speak with me. And then when I came back, it made it much more effective for me to be able to counter the lies, because I had seen
Mhm.
firsthand myself what the truth was.
Right. So, we'd love to thank you. And just to give, an overview. So, we've spoken with John about Pakistan-Bangladesh relations, America's role in the stability here, Trump moving with a more different approach than the conventional one, how things can shape and happen. Most importantly, sifting between disinformation and misinformation when you are dealing with complex situations, particularly here in a region like Pakistan and Bangladesh, where it's very easy. And most importantly, which you've mentioned, this is a tiny effort from our platform, which is a volunteer effort, to be honest, from Pakistan and Bangladesh to talk in English, because we really believe that people across the globe need to listen to, one, our point of view, two, we need to get to communicate to people as well, to get to know their point of view and to reach to a conclusion, because it's very important for us and them to understand each other after the globalization in particular, or to handle disinformation and misinformation. So first of all, I'd like to thank you, John, Mr. Ambassador, to be here, because it was really a privilege to get to learn and know more from you. We'd love to have you again here. And thank you so much for giving us such elaborative details as much as you could. But I think we really have a lot to talk about more in coming days, particularly because after the interim government is going to go, or maybe the new government is going to come, what challenges are there, what can be. And of course, I would love to have a candid conversation about your stay here in Pakistan and Bangladesh, which food you like the best, or were you okay with the spices? Or maybe you can give a comment or two about if you were okay with the spices, because Pakistanis in different regions are having a lot of spices. So was it okay, John?
Just don't ask me whether the mangoes were better in Pakistan or Bangladesh, or don't ask me which cricket team I support. No, I thank you very much for this invitation and the opportunity to speak. There's a lot more we can and should talk about. Hopefully, I'll have an opportunity to visit Pakistan myself before the end of the year. And I'd really like to speak more with you and others about the concrete opportunities to enhance collaboration, cooperation between Pakistan and Bangladesh. I think this is one of the areas the interim government has done a great job in Bangladesh, again, in terms of opening the doors. And that sentiment has been reciprocated by Pakistan, including most recently during the deputy prime minister's visit. So there's definitely a sense of momentum, and I think platforms such as yours and the conversations that you're having play an important role in the citizen to citizen dimension of this. So congratulations, and you can certainly count on my full support.
Thank you, John. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. And definitely, I'd be looking for your support because that's exactly how we want to build a proper dialogue platform where we can talk and we can converse and all. Uh, Thank you so much to our viewers and listeners. I do understand that we have long gaps in between different conversations, but you have to understand it's a total solo platform, which I'm trying to manage on my own. And John is very much, a witness to what happened in the beginning. So there are so many glitches going on, but I'm hoping to make it a better one because, in all honesty, I really wish that we connect with warmth, and we need to talk more to bring this world to peace because we need to breathe, all of us, particularly in South Asia. Thank you very much, everybody. Hope to speak to you again. This is Sadi Sattar from PakBanglaConnect, and we had with us our Ambassador Jon, and we'll be talking to you again. Pak Bangla Dosti Zindabad. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.